everybody. Welcome to Farro Mt Eden, and thank you so much for coming out on such a chilly night. My name is Fiona, and I work at Farro. We are really excited tonight to have Ben Warren from BePure to talk to us about our gut health, and I'm sure we're going to all learn a lot. Just a couple of housekeeping things. One, the bathrooms are down here. If you want to go to a bathroom, just ask Vicky or Vicky who's over here in the glasses or myself, and we'll give you the code. Please also scan in from a QR code point of view with what's going on in Wellington. Really encourage that. And we've got a couple of late arrivals, but we're going to kick off because we think who knows what's happened to them. So welcome, Ben, and we look forward to hearing what you've got to say.
Thanks, Sue.
We are streaming it as well, so but it's facing that way if anyone's wondering what's going on.
All right. Thank you very much for coming, everybody. My name's, hopefully, can you hear me okay? Yeah. If you do struggle, just let me know at any point. So, yeah, my name's Ben Warren. I'm a clinical nutritionist. I'm founder of BePure Health. And so I kind of thought tonight, before we get into how I became a nutritionist was actually because of gut health. And so I thought I'd share with you my story as to how I came here, and then also how I sort of kind of fell into getting so heavily into gut health 12 years ago. And so I never intended to be a nutritionist. I'm originally from North London, and I was a very good golfer. And I got a golf scholarship from North London to go to the University of South Carolina and play golf. And so natural progression for me was actually to be a touring pro golfer. And I met my wife, who's a Kiwi, and so I'm kind of like a souvenir from her OE that she brought me back to New Zealand, and I'm very thankful for that. And the natural progression was to, like I say, become a touring golfer. But as soon as I left university and the coaches and physios at university, my back pretty much just fell apart. And so I became a professional golf coach for a number of years, 3 years, trying to get my back sorted so I could go out on tour. And I was on a course learning about optimal joint mechanics, biomechanics. And it was about the third or fourth day of this course when a lady looked at me and she said, "Ben, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I can see you've got a really bad back." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, how do you know I've got a bad back?" And she's like, "Well, I can see you've got a twist in your pelvis, you've got a scoliosis in your spine, you've got one shoulder higher than the other. When you're swinging the golf club just then, your transverse abdominal muscle's not firing at all. You've got no support for your back. It's probably trashed." And I looked at her and I was like, wow, that's incredible. I already knew that. I was working with Exelflex Physio. I had an osteopath, a massage therapist, and a chiropractor all on my team that I was seeing weekly. And then she said something that changed my life. She said, "Yeah, it looks like it's driven by a food intolerance. Look like it's there." And, yeah. And I looked at her like, "You're nuts." Like, first of all, I said to her, "How can a food intolerance give me a bad back?" And she's like, "Well, you've got shared nerve innervations from your spinal segments, and your organs. So as soon as you start shutting down your organs, like your small intestine, you're going to shut down nerve innervation to this very important muscle that stabilizes your pelvis." And she goes, "And yours doesn't fire at all. I was watching when you were swinging the golf club. Your belly button's meant to go in as you start the downswing. Yours wasn't, so it's not firing." And anyway, and I'm like, "Well, what makes you think it's dairy?" And she goes, "Well, I'm just guessing it's dairy, but you don't breathe very well through your nose, and your head's migrated forward so you can breathe better through your mouth. And so my posture, it's quite easy to pick probably, my posture background was kind of like this. Right, it's probably pretty easy to pick, now, when you know what you're looking for, right?" And I was still pretty skeptical, but what she was saying made a lot of sense to me. So I'm like, well, surely it should be a test that I could take. And she goes, "Yeah, you need to do an IgG, IgA, and ELISA blood test. There's no labs run it in New Zealand. You have to send it to America." And I'm like, "Great, how would I get one of them?" And she's like, "Well, I can organise that." So we got that organised. And a number of weeks later, the results came back. That I had a very severe immune response to whey protein, which is obviously a protein found in dairy. So I cut out dairy. My back didn't get better straight away, but what happened within 2 weeks, my asthma that I'd had since I was 7 years old, had quite decent asthma since I was 7, disappeared in 2 weeks. And I was like, oh my gosh, how did I not know? How did I not know this? I thought I was a smart person. How did I not know that the food I was eating had such a dramatic impact on my experience of life, my health? And I was like, how does everyone not know this? And so I called up the lady and said, "Where did you learn this stuff?" Because I've never heard of anyone talk like that before back then. So, we're going back here 18 or 19 years ago. Excuse me. And she said, "I'm trained through one of the top health and performance institutes in the world in California." So I went and retrained 3 years through them, then got a master's degree in holistic nutrition, and started helping people. So I opened the BePure clinic, which is originally based in Havelock North, and BePure began from there. So I started helping people and I was running these IgG, tests on people and seeing some results. And most people had a handful of foods that they needed to avoid, getting some really nice results. And then 12 years ago, we moved. Actually, it's 13 now. We moved on to we wanted our own property, a bigger property, so we could grow our own food. So I live on a 15-acre permaculture designed organic farm where we grow about 80% of the food we eat. And so wanted to move on to land so we could grow more food. And so we moved on to sort of our dream farm, 15 acres. I call it a farm. For somebody from London, that's a farm. Yeah. And so my wife started getting gut issues. And so I was like, oh, well, let's run this IgA ELISA blood test. So I ran this test, and it looks at 96 different foods and tells you your immune response to 96 different foods. And she came back that she couldn't eat anything. Like, everything was elevated to all 96 foods. I'd never seen anything like it in my life. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's something like really bad going on with your gut. I think you might have a parasite. And so I then we did a bunch of standard testing in New Zealand, but parasite testing in New Zealand, they only really look for parasites that are going to kill you, which is good. You want to make sure you haven't got Giardia or Salmonella or these kind of things, but they don't look for things that just kind of wreck your gut. And so we actually found a lab in America, and we sent a sample over to America, and lo and behold, we found quite a common waterborne parasite called Blastocyst hominis. And interestingly enough, the couple that built property, German couple, they built it to kind of retire, and that was it. They built their perfect home, and she'd got ME while living there. I don't know if it was mediated, but probably was. And so we later traced, by the way, this parasite to our farm water. And so so anyway, so that got me heavily into parasitology. Like, it was a real hobby for a while there. We've tested more stool samples privately in New Zealand than probably anybody in Australasia. So we've tested a lot of poo. These days, microbiome mapping. So these days we do a lot of mapping of the microbiome. So the microbiome is this community of organisms that resides within our digestive system. About people say it's up to about 2 kilos of weight of bacteria within our body. Very, very important, the microbiome, because we'll talk about that as we get into all sorts of different aspects. But we're gonna talk about the importance of that today. So anyway, very much got through the clinic into doing a lot of gastrointestinal mapping, a lot of parasitology, a lot of very, very specific immunology. These are like levels beyond what's funded to be done in New Zealand. Okay, and so from that we very much got known with the BePure clinic for autoimmune conditions and helping put autoimmune conditions into remission. And so we got very much known for that. And at the peak before COVID, we were people were flying in from China for gut-related conditions. People were flying in from LA, California. So I'm going to be sharing with you the basics around gut health. So we got like an hour to kind of go through the basics of gut health. So when you start looking at, I just want to explain something called leaky gut syndrome or increased intestinal permeability. Some of you are nodding. All right, this is good if you've already heard of it. If you haven't, don't worry. Okay, so in our intestines, think small intestine, which is like sausage factory in the middle. This is where we absorb a lot of our nutrients from our foods. We have junctures, our cells, like our skin. We have junctures of our cells that should be very tight, okay? But when we start getting inflammation in their intestines, these junctures start getting loose. And they start letting proteins and big proteins through abundantly that shouldn't be there. And so if you start getting a lot of big proteins into your bloodstream, your body will start tagging them as an invader and start attacking them. So this is what happened for me. So see, whenever we're eating food, your body has to differentiate, particularly the proteins. Is that protein food, or is that protein a virus or a bacteria? Because viruses and bacteria are just proteins too. And so our immune system has to differentiate between these. But if we start getting an elevated immune response because we're eating a particular protein, and gluten is probably the most common, and I'll talk about that more later, Dairy is very common as well in the modern world. Eggs are a little bit common as well. So people, these are some really common food intolerances that people are having. The immune system will start seeing that protein regularly and go, hang on, that protein was here yesterday. And it wasn't meant to be in its whole form in the bloodstream. And so the immune system will build specialized immune molecules to attack it. Okay, so then you get the elevated immune response. And so the problems with this, it then leads to a lot of other problems throughout your whole body, because molecular mimicry, what happens is your body will then start recognizing other proteins in your body and start attacking them. So you start losing the differentiation between self and non-self within the proteins. And depending on your genes, that then usually expresses as autoimmune conditions. Things such as rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis, rosacea, skin conditions, autoimmune thyroid conditions like Graves', Hashimoto's. And so, so this is I've brought a few studies, not too many. I didn't want to bore you with studies. But, this is modulation of the immune function by dietary lectins in rheumatoid arthritis. So basically talking about how people with rheumatoid arthritis probably going to do best without eating gluten, okay, because of these pathways. So this leaky gut or increased intestinal permeability is a big problem. We're going to come back to it. We're going to talk about how it all kind of goes through. So gut health is really important for a number of reasons. The first and foremost reason is that it's where we break down our food and where we absorb nutrition. Okay, so if we're not breaking down our food, absorbing the nutrients, we're going to start rate limiting our body's processes, which basically means, number one, energy production. It's going to get less, so we're going to have less energy. You're going to then start seeing a rate limitation of various functions throughout your body. We're actually it's very difficult to kill us by nutrition. As I'm quite surprised how people don't get killed from eating McDonald's every day. We're incredibly resilient as an organism. And so we've got to be getting the nutrients, we've got to be breaking down the protein so we can get the amino acids to rebuild our skin, our bones, our ligaments. And so this happens in the digestive system. So if you've got problems in your digestive system, you're going to be struggling from a nutritional status perspective. The second big reason why it's so important is because it's the home of your immune system. So 80% of your humoral immune system, so that's the part of the immune system that protects you from the outside world, is located in your digestive system. And the reason being for this is the easiest way to get a pathogen into your body is to eat it. And so, like I say, whatever we're eating, our immune system's looking at what we're eating and determining whether it's a friend or a foe. And for this reason, when we start getting a lot of gut problems, we start then inflammation. So inflammation is collateral damage by the immune system. What does it look like? It looks like skin issues. It looks like aches and pains. That's the number one thing that we get when we have inflammation, is increased aches and pains. It looks like a blood marker like your C-reactive protein being above 3. Okay, so you start getting elevated inflammatory proteins in your blood, released by your liver. So gut health is really important from a very basic level, just around controlling inflammation and controlling, making sure you're getting your nutrients. But it's got as we go through, you're going to see it's got much far-reaching effects than that. So how do you know if you've got a gut problem? Well, starting up top, if you get any kind of reaction from your lips, from foods, like they swell up, that's most likely an IgE, which is an allergy response. So that's a good sign you don't want that in your body. Right? So even if you put anything on your skin and you get a rash on your skin, some of you may have had children where at some stage in their life, particularly when they're young, like strawberries will cause a reaction, okay, on the skin. So anything like that gives you a reaction on the skin, don't eat it. It's a good indication that your immune system's responding to it. So if you have acid reflux, heartburn, indigestion, food repeats on you, increased belching, then we know we've got a problem in the stomach. If you then start getting bloating, again, excess gas production, then that's going to be more likely in the small intestine. And then if you start moving into the large intestine, where constipation, we'll define some of these things as we go through, loose stools, undigested food in your stools, a diagnosis of irritable bowel disease or IBS, bowel syndromes, all these things, they're red flags. We know there's a problem in the gut. And if you've got a problem anywhere in the digestive system, you're going to have problems elsewhere. I had a client many years ago now, who she was a 14-year-old girl, And she did come back from Hamilton from in the gastro specialist, and because she had stomach ulcers, and she put on Losec because of stomach ulcers, and so she just had the camera down the throat, and they couldn't find really anything wrong except that she had stomach ulcers, and so they just put her on Losec. And so her mother thought, well, she didn't want her 14-year-old child on Losec for the rest of her life, so she brought her to me. And so in our initial chat, I'm sitting down with them, and one of my first questions invariably is, how are your bowel movements? Like, it's a really important thing. Like, how do you sleep and how are your bowel movements? It's like a couple of the first questions I'm always going to ask people, because those two are absolutely key to being healthy. And so mum was like, oh, she really struggles in that department, once every 7 days, which isn't too bad. I had somebody the other day come up to me and said their daughter's once every 32 days. So I'm like, wow, that's really getting out there. So anyway, once every 7 days, I'm like, okay, describe the symptomology that you get when you eat food. And she goes, well, when I eat anything, I just feel it doesn't go down. And it just kind of sits there. And then after a while, it starts kind of repeating on me, and I get like a burning feeling in my throat. And I'm like, okay. And I'm thinking to myself, sounds like the tube's full. This tube is a 20 to 30 foot long tube, this digestive system. And so if you've plugged up one end, it can't go down. It literally can't go down. And so all we did was get her bowels working, and within a month, she no longer needed Losec or stomach. Everyone was looking at the wrong end of the tube. Everyone was looking at this end of the tube, but problems at that end of the tube. Okay, so if you've got a problem anywhere in this tube, you've got problems. All right, so I'm just telling you that just to highlight, because some of you go, well, I don't really have a gut problem, I just get a little bit of this. Well, then actually, it probably is a gut problem. All right, so yeah, that's probably a pretty good place. So health problems that may be related to your gut issues. And so because of the relationship to inflammation, I think really that is inflammatory by nature has the possibility to be associated with the gut issue. We certainly know a lot of autoimmune diseases. There's a lot of pathways that can trigger autoimmunity, but the research shows that a lot of autoimmune diseases are associated with this. Even things like, and genetics associated with that. There's a gene called HLA1 gene. Anyone know if you've got HLA1? HLA1. So HLA1 is a gene that makes you, just under 95% of celiacs have this gene. So it's a gene that expresses a lot of autoimmunity. And the interesting thing, if you get Klebsiella, which is quite a nasty bacteria, I mean, most of us can get Klebsiella and we may not even notice, we may just get a little bit of diarrhea. But if you have HLA gene and you get Klebsiella, it triggers pancreatic spondylitis. Okay? So it's often a combination of your gene together with the environment that triggers these expressions. So it can be associated with very severe health conditions. It's because of the autoimmune nature of thyroid, like I mentioned, it can be associated with underactive and overactive thyroids. Every case of underactive thyroid I've ever seen clinically, every case I've ever seen, gluten has been a problem in every case of underactive thyroid. Right? So if you have an underactive thyroid, I recommend going gluten-free. And then there's something called the gut-brain axis. So the gut-brain axis is this relationship between our gut and our brain. And so, we have this gut feeling, and the research is actually showing now that we do have a gut feeling. This article says that. It's a gut feeling, how the gut microbiota affects the state of the mind. Okay, so we do actually have a gut feeling, and a lot of research is now looking at how gut problems in the gut are then communicated through to the brain, okay, and affecting mental health, depression, anxiety, heavily being associated now with gut. We're even starting to look at using the gastrointestinal microbiota and mapping of that and diagnosis for depression, actually as a test for depression. Because depression is looking like it's an inflammatory disease. Right? So we start seeing this relationship between how we think and feel and brain function and the gut. No surprises to me, because it is literally all connected. It's I still find it quite funny when people talk, like it's like your foot's not connected to your hand. It's all connected. If you get a problem anywhere in your body, it's going to affect anywhere else in your body. All right. So anyway, so there's a lot of health problems, skin issues, hormonal issues, fatigue, sleep issues that can all be being driven from gut issues. Right. So very, very common. So the gut-brain connection. So then we start looking at, there's another factor when we look at this gut-brain connection, which is actually not only is the gut impacting the brain, but the brain is also impacting the gut. And they don't actually know sometimes which one's causing which. All right. And so this is particularly the case when it comes to stress. Okay. So I've got one here, I think, the microbiota gut-brain axis in gastrointestinal disorders. Is it stressed bugs or stressed brain? Because if you have stressed bugs, that then affects the brain function. But if you have a stressed brain, like physically stressed, like in regards to, when I say physically, I mean, don't have to be physically stressed, just mental, emotional stress, financial stress, that then alters your gut microbiota. In fact, they've done studies with mice. They're a little mean, these studies, but I think they're wonderful. Where they take the microbiota of a mouse who has anxiety. So and so they look at they map this mouse's gut microbiome, and you can see it has anxiety based on the microbiome. And so, and then what they do, you're coming up so you can hear better. Oh, cold back there. Fair enough. And then what they do, they take that anxious microbiome out of that mouse and put it in a mouse that doesn't have anxiety, and that mouse will then get anxiety from having the anxious microbiome. And then they've done it reverse. They take a normal mouse that doesn't have anxiety, and then they give the mouse anxiety by forcing it to swim. So they do forced swim tests. They put the mouse in water and force it to swim. And the mouse starts developing anxiety about swimming. It's mean. I was going to say sounds mean. It's not. It sounds mean. It isn't. Anyway, so they make the mouse swim, and then the mouse starts developing anxiety, and then they look at the microbiome, and the microbiome has changed to represent an anxious microbiome. So we can come at the system from both ways. We can come at the system from changing the gut. We're going to talk about lots of wonderful foods that we can do to do that. But if we still have the stressor up here driving the problem, it may not work. In fact, as a clinician, I'm going to say it's not going to work. Right? You want to always look to try and find the root cause of the issue within the body and eliminate that root cause. And if that root cause is mental, emotional stress, then that's what you want to go after. The research shows even with diagnosis of irritable bowel syndrome is that it can be triggered by stress, by mental, emotional stress. All right. So I want to give you, before we get into giving you some strategies for foods for your gut, it'd be remiss of me not to talk about stress, okay, and strategies for stress. So we want to be looking to try and manage stress as much as possible. Managing stress seems like an oxymoron. But so I'm going to give you a couple of tips that the research shows and what I found clinically to be very, very effective to really help with stress. So I love how stress is either in the past or in the future. Right, so if I was to say to you right now, sitting here right now, where is your stress? Right now, this very moment, where is your stress? Yeah, you really haven't got any. You might have a slightly sore arm or something because you're sitting down, but hopefully you're over the stress of getting here in the traffic, and hopefully you're not worrying too much about what you're going to feed your family when you get home. So these everyday little stresses that bioaccumulate. And so if we can stay in the present moment, there's an incredible capacity to reduce stress. And so this is what mindfulness is and what meditation is able to do. Mindfulness is really being aware of the experience you're having in the moment you're experiencing it. So it's just being aware that at the moment you're sitting down. Okay? Because if you can be aware of what experience you're having, then when you're having an experience that you don't want, you actually have the capacity to change that internally. Does that make sense? It's kind of a complex issue, but if you're kind of asleep at the wheel and you don't even know you're angry at that person while you're driving the car because they just cut you up, so that's a stressor. Whereas if you're more mindful, you might see the fact that you're angry at that person, have a little laugh at yourself for getting stressed and taking some hours, maybe days off your life with cortisol and stress hormones for that person in front of you, and go back to having more pleasant thoughts. Okay, and so mindfulness is really cultivating this, being aware of the experience you're having in the moment you're having it, and meditation is a tool to cultivate mindfulness. And so there's some wonderful apps out there like Insight Timer, where it's a free app, and there's thousands of different meditations, whatever your flavor is. And so I would recommend that, highly recommend that. Research shows, didn't bring research on tonight, but research shows that it's very, very strong for a whole bunch of health parameters, reducing stress, improving mental health outcomes, improving physical health outcomes. So these are things that we all really are striving for, I hope. So meditation is definitely a tool. There's another tool that we can use to really tap directly into our autonomic nervous system and reduce our stress. So if I was to say to you right now, I was going to say go ahead and relax, but you're looking pretty relaxed already. But see if you can just relax a little bit more. Nice. Good job. So some of you did a good job. Some of you, I mean, like I say, you're already looking probably pretty relaxed. I'd give you like a 7 out of 10 for relax at the moment. But some of you sort of like a little shake. You got more relaxed, which is good. Now, for many of us, we don't know how to relax. Okay, so when I say that, go ahead and relax. Maybe some of you are a bit like, what do you mean, go ahead and relax? Do you mean go have a Chardonnay? Or, how we relax? A lot of us relax with alcohol. I'm not saying that's wrong or bad, it's just what we do. And so what we can do is we can use our breathing and tap directly into our autonomic nervous system by breathing. So a lot of us are stuck in an inverted breathing pattern, which means we're running a marathon. Okay, so if you put one hand on your chest, one hand on your tummy, okay, and just have a big breath in for me, and just see which hand moves first. So breathe in, which hand moves first, which hand moves most, and then breathe out. Okay, and again, so breathing in, which hand moves first, which hand moves most. So for some of you, you may have found that your chest moved first and moved most. And so that's a breathing pattern that's actually associated with running a marathon. Right? And you may well have run a marathon today, but chances are you maybe haven't, but mentally and emotionally, you may have run a marathon. And so your body's physiology has changed your breathing pattern that's associated with the fight or flight response and running away. And so we then get stuck in this breathing pattern. And why this is so problematic for the digestive system is because we have our autonomic nervous system has two branches, the sympathetic and parasympathetic. And so while we're in a fight or flight stress response, sympathetic, our parasympathetic nervous system gets suppressed. And the nerve innervation for our digestive system is controlled by your parasympathetic nervous system. And so you have to be relaxed in order to break down and digest your food, to get the pancreatic enzyme released, to get the hydrochloric acid released, to get the small intestine motility. You have to be relaxed. And so one thing, people who are stressed coming to the clinic is, start being aware of breathing while they're eating. And if they're still in this, like you don't want to be dashboard dining for sure, like in the car eating, because chances are you're going to be stressed. And if you're stressed, you shut down your nerve innervation to actually digest the food. So there's a simple breathing technique. Ideally, you want to be breathing in diaphragmatically, so breathing into your tummy, right? So as you breathe in, your tummy goes out. So let's have a go at this. So just put one hand on your chest, one hand on your tummy. So as you breathe in, make your tummy go out. So breathe in, tummy goes out, and then breathe out, tummy goes in. Okay, and then we're going to breathe in for 4. So bring in, 2, 3, 4, and hold there. 2, 3, 4, and then breathe out. 2, 3, 4. Hold for 2, 3, 4. And breathing in. 2, 3, 4, and hold for 2, 3, 4. And breathing out for 2, 3, 4. Okay, and just go ahead and relax there. So just that little forced under breathing, what it will do, it will talk directly to your autonomic nervous system, to your parasympathetic nervous system, say, relax. Okay, so and then you can measure your blood pressure. If any of you have high blood pressure, you can just put a blood pressure cuff on. You can name your blood pressure after a while, just by controlling your breathing, controlling your thoughts. Okay. The breathing. Okay, so if you find it very, very difficult, it's just probably a sign that we've been stuck in this breathing pattern for a long time. Okay, so it's going to take some retraining, and it can take up to 3 months to retrain it. So again, it's just going to take some awareness. So I'd recommend just like cues. So like if you drive to work, every time you see a red light, that's your cue to check in on your breathing, and just think about breathing diaphragmatically. Okay, and a lot of yoga classes, they teach this is a yoga type breathing. So again, so maybe yoga and yoga breathing may be beneficial. So it's about finding what works for you, really. We have to retrain. Yes, anything. You have to retrain your nervous system. Yeah. And so, but you can see hopefully how important that is for gut health. Fantastic. All right, so that's breathing. So stomach function. So the food, we've eaten the food, it goes down the esophagus into the stomach. So it's a J-shaped pouch that expands. It releases hydrochloric acid. Hydrochloric acid is key not only to break down the proteins, but also to trigger the alkaline response from the pancreas of pancreatic enzymes and bicarbonate soda. And that alkalizes the small intestine. So this is really important because that stops you from getting bloated. Because the reason we get bloated is when we eat foods and the bacteria that live in the large intestine, so further on, like 20 feet down the tube, they like an acidic environment. And so if you haven't pH set up correctly in your digestive system, you should go acid, stomach, alkaline small intestine, acid large intestine. So if you start getting an acid small intestine, you start growing the beneficial bacteria and unfriendly bacteria that should be in your large intestine in your small intestine. And they start producing gas, and that causes you to bloat because the gas hasn't got any way to get out, top or bottom. Okay? And so, so the hydrochloric acid is really key to setting up the digestive system and digestive function. So there's some things that you can do to support hydrochloric acid production. Lemon juice before you eat, like lemon juice, a little bit of water, a little bit of acid, apple cider vinegar. Okay, first thing in the morning. Again, just to try and support this digestive function. Being relaxed and breathing mathematically is going to be probably one of the keys. Now, another really important aspect is your parietal cells need zinc to make hydrochloric acid. Okay, so if you haven't got enough zinc, you can't make very strong hydrochloric acid. And if you can't make very strong hydrochloric acid, that only can also cause the bloating. But this not very strong hydrochloric acid can actually cause acid reflux. I know that seems strange, but let me explain why. So the valve, the pyloric valve at the bottom of the stomach, will only open when you have very strong acid. And so if you've only got like a mild acid, that valve won't open, and so then the food sits in your stomach and you start getting it repeating on you. It's estimated that 80% of people with symptomology of an over-acid condition actually haven't got enough stomach acid for the stomach to work. Simple tip for this, okay, so if you're somebody, we don't have to break it down. If you're somebody who gets acid reflux, the next time you get acid reflux, have a shot of apple cider vinegar. Now, it's either going to make you worse or better. If it's better, you know you haven't got enough hydrochloric acid. If it makes you worse, you know you've got another problem. Okay? And so that other problem is probably a food shutting down the small intestine. And so first port of call there is going to be gluten. All right? And so because if you eat a body immune system thing, is the invader, it'll shut down the small intestine, shut down the pyloric valve to stop any more of that food coming into your system because it thinks it's getting attacked by a virus or bacteria. Does that make sense? I know it's a bit technical and a bit heavy. We're going to get onto what to do shortly. So we're going to do a zinc taste test. So fortunately, the ability to taste zinc is zinc dependent. All right. So in your little bag there is a little bottle of zinc. I'll ask you to go ahead and grab it. Some of you are looking nervous. All right, what we may do is just just pop your hand up if you haven't got any drink left. If you haven't got any drink, we may can we bring round some drinks for people if that's okay? Can we maybe give them a drink or just a top up on something? You're gonna need a drink afterwards, that's all, because it tastes horrible. Yeah. Okay. So just quick drinks run. Highly recommend the pink one. Have a glass. If you're at home, have a drink ready. Good. Awesome. All right. Yeah, just hold on to the drink for the moment. You're going to need that after. You're a chaser. We just need a top up on the front here. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to talk you through the zinc taste test, and we're all going to do it together. So this is the zinc of about 2 oysters. So it's not a huge amount of zinc, but it's a nice amount of zinc. And so what I'm going to do is, there's 10 mils in this, so it's not a huge amount. It's like, in a tablespoon, is it? Teaspoon's fine, yeah, so 2 teaspoons. And so you're going to empty the bottle in your mouth, and you're going to hold it in your mouth and swill like mouthwash. And you're going to keep swilling. We're going to do this together. We're going to keep swilling until you get a strong, astringent taste, in which case you can just go ahead and swallow. All right? Now, I'm going to be counting, and when I get to 10, I'll say go ahead and swallow anyway. And so your zinc response is based on your taste of it, because there's an enzyme metallothionein, which is dependent on zinc to work, which allows you to taste zinc. So it's going to give us an indication of your zinc status. It's actually probably the best measure for zinc. Zinc's a very poor measure in blood. We don't often see zinc out in your blood unless you've got literally none. All right, so go ahead and crack them open then, and we're going to do it together, okay? So I'll count you down. It's like doing shots, eh? Who would have thought? Yeah, as soon as you get a strong taste, you can swallow it. Okay, so ready? I'll count you down to 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Bottoms up, and then hold it in your mouth and swill like mouthwash. Keep swilling, swill, swill, swill. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and swallow. Fantastic. So, all right, yeah, it's good. Have a drink. Just all right. So, how many of you got a strong astringent taste within 5 seconds? 5 seconds within 5 seconds of putting it in? Anybody? Within 5 seconds, strong astringent taste? Nobody. Okay, 6 to 10 seconds. 6 to 10 seconds. Okay, so your zinc status is probably okay. Very good. How many of you didn't taste it till after you swallowed? So it's a mild zinc deficiency. So most of you, by the way, according to the USDA research, 80% of women are deficient. Anyone just put water, any water. So that's a severe zinc deficiency. Okay. So my recommendation: high zinc foods are going to be oysters. Good excuse to eat oysters. Expensive way to get your zinc levels up, Brian. But then zinc is found in a lot of our common everyday foods like beef, lamb, milk, maple syrup, sesame seeds, pumpkin seeds. So eggs. So we probably, most of us eat those foods, but we're not eating enough to meet our requirement. And then once we get zinc deficient, we often we struggle to uptake zinc once we get zinc deficient. So we need more zinc to get our zinc levels up and then get it from our food. Okay, so if people come into my clinic and they're zinc deficient, they've got gut issues, like they're not making hydrochloric acid. If they're not making hydrochloric acid, they're going to be bloated, no matter what they eat. Anytime they eat any carbohydrates, invariably, they're going to get bloated. Right? Even like kumra, which is really good carbohydrate, shouldn't get bloated from it. It's a beneficial prebiotic. And so what I'd get them to do is we have a product called Digestive, which is digestive enzymes and hydrochloric acid, and I'd get them to take that when they eat to support the production of hydrochloric acid and enzymes to break down the food, to get the upper digestive system working. I'd also be getting them on zinc restore, okay, to get their zinc levels up, because I don't want them having to take that forever. Right? That's just short term while you get your zinc levels up, and then once you get your zinc levels up, theoretically you should be able to make your own hydrochloric acid, so you don't need to supplement hydrochloric acid. Right? Does that make sense? But still, lemon and apple cider vinegar is probably good for most of us, just to support acid production going forward, right? Especially if you're stressed. Does that make sense?
If you eat a lot of oysters, how long does the zinc last?
If you eat a lot of oysters, how long does the zinc last? Great.
Do you have to eat oysters every day?
No, that's a great question. No, we store minerals very well in our body, and so the zinc depends how much you're using zinc. So, for example, energy production we use zinc, stress we use zinc, the production of hormones is zinc dependent, and so wound healing is zinc dependent. So you may have great zinc status, but then you have a car accident, or you get surgery, like your knee replacement or something, and then you use up all your zinc reserves in wound healing, and then you get gut issues because you've no longer got any zinc. And so it's just kind of like balancing these things. Fantastic. Good. So then the food's moving down to the small intestine. So the small intestine is it's where we absorb most of the nutrition into our bloodstream. And this is where primarily the leaky gut or increased permeability occurs. And so there's some things that we really, you've got to avoid here. The best things that we can do for our small intestine are actually avoiding things. Okay, obviously get the stomach working really well. The small intestine, but the research, really showing that Western diet is a big problem. The Western diet. There's a number of studies on this. So, must be this one. Yeah. So this is changes in intestinal tight junction permeability, so leaky gut, associated with industrial food additives, explain the rising incidence of autoimmune disease. So they're basically saying because of, the Western processed foods that we're eating and the food additives in there, that's driving leaky gut. And so some of the foods they're actually pointing to are glucose, sugar. Okay, so the amount of sugar we're eating, and gluten. Okay, and then there's a whole bunch of more technical additives that are being used. So you're moving to a whole food-based diet. Simple, he says. Rolls off the tongue easily. Place like this, very easy. So we want a whole food diet from the Western style diet as much as possible. So sugar feeds the unfriendly bacteria. It feeds the yeasts. It feeds the Klebsiella. These bacteria that are kind of background, but you should only have small levels of them. But once you start getting an overgrowth of those guys, it can become really problematic for your digestive system, particularly for your large intestine, right? Because that's where they're going to be residing. And then gluten. So for me, my recommendation around gluten is that if you have anything at all wrong with you, I would recommend going gluten-free. If you have nothing wrong with you, I don't mind you having gluten sometimes, but the research does show it's inflammatory for everybody. So you just have to be mindful of that. Okay, so I have no problems at all with gluten, but I try and avoid it. But having said that, I do like croissants now and again, and so I'll have croissants now and again. Okay? And so just get to certain levels wherever you want to set them. I used to be super hardcore, didn't have a gram of sugar for 2 years. And so that's actually not that healthy either, believe it or not. You then become very anal about food and stressed about eating and what to eat, which is not good either. All right, so you've got to be somewhere in the middle is probably pretty good. Right? So when it comes to the small intestine, it's more about eliminating foods. So the biggest food intolerances that we see are going to be gluten, and then followed by dairy. All right. So if anyone's got a respiratory issue at all, a lot of mucus production, dairy's gone. Okay. Have trouble breathing through the nose, dairy's gone. I know it's tough. You will be addicted to these foods. All right. So for me, I was addicted to dairy. I didn't, before I found out about it. I wouldn't feel full until I'd had a glass of milk because I'd been bloated my whole life. And so I didn't actually feel full until I got bloated. So then I'd eat a big meal and I'd be like, I'm still hungry because I wasn't bloated. So I'd drink a glass of milk. I'd then get bloated and go, oh, I'm full now. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So these intolerances, can you develop them? Yes, you can. Absolutely, yeah. So my wife had no food intolerances at all. She could eat anything she wanted. She picked up this parasite from the water, and then she couldn't eat any food. Okay, so then what we did, we rebuilt. I put her on a 4-day rotation diet, so she wasn't allowed to eat the same food for 4 days. So if she had eggs, she wasn't allowed eggs again for another 4 days. So by rotating the foods, you're rotating the antigen and rotating the protein, and so the immune system doesn't get as triggered. And so we managed her symptomology through that, and then we started looking, obviously knocking out the parasite. But once we did that, we then started looking to heal the gut and rebuild the gut. So these are the things you can do for your small intestine. So things to rebuild the gut are going to be bone broth, chicken broth, collagen supplementation, or gelatin. Okay, so jelly. Yum. So you just make a fruit jelly. Don't need that extra sugar. Just get some, get some fresh berries or frozen berries. Make some jelly. Follow the instructions. Okay, set it, and then you've got jelly, and you get to eat jelly for pudding. And so we make a lot of very concentrated. That was a royal we. I don't. My wife does. I have made them in the past, but I don't make them these days. And so, very, very strong jelly using turmeric, so that we call them gummies. So we make gummies, but they're turmeric gummies. Okay. And so I had a friend who she's had gut issues for years, for 15 years. She's done a lot of traveling in India, so she probably picked up something while there. And she's been a friend for many years. And for some reason, she'd only just started, like, she'd never asked me about her gut or anything. She'd asked my wife. And she started watching some videos online about gut health. And so she started doing some things. And so she started taking those two, which is the probiotic and the gut assist, and eating gummies. And her gut issues have gone. And she's had them for years, and just from like basic stuff, supporting hydrochloric acid production and then healing the gut. So these guys, I used to be really hardcore, even around recommendations of this. Some of my clients, I'd get them to eat 8 cups of this a day. Yeah, so it starts getting a bit much. You have to start trying to hide it in everything. Like, you have pumpkin soup and you put, that's the base of the pumpkin soup. And for me, I just have it in the afternoon, like as a nice hot toddy, no alcohol. But just like chicken stock, bone broth. I just put mist in it on side. On later saying seaweed in it, it's very good. So so we've got to get this. These are the substrates that we need to heal the villi. So the villi are to introduce new concepts. Are the fingers of the small intestine to help us increase absorption. All right. So heaps of this stuff. It's going to be really good. As much as you can, and then we start moving into the large intestine. So the large intestine is obviously the home of our microbiome to a large part. So there's bacteria. And like I said, they very much communicate to the brain. In fact, they make 50% of our dopamine, our feel-good reward-during transmitter. They make 80% of our serotonin is made in our gut by the bacteria. They make a lot of short-chain fatty acids that are very critical for a lot of functions throughout our body. Cellular signaling. Short-chain fatty acids are really important as well for the health of the large intestine to protect against colon cancer. Okay, so these guys are really critical that we're looking after these guys. Plus, they are kind of like the center of our immunity. So the bacteria in our gut is talking to our immune system. Our immune system's constantly checking it and checking in on it, and so it very much controls our immune system. So this is why a lot of the original research around probiotics was on immunity. Okay, it was like, oh, you take probiotics for immunity. It's because of this relationship to, so much of our immune system is in the gut. Now, obviously that body of research has now gone out and they're looking at probiotics for, not only probiotics for mental health, so you take specific strains for anxiety or depression, metabolic health, weight loss, inflammatory diseases like rheumatoid arthritis. So there's all sorts of, you're really beginning to map this microbiome. So when we look at the bacteria, how do you know if you've got problems in the large intestine? Well, invariably, you've got to have a happy poo. Happy poo means a happy you. So let's talk about bowel movements. You probably didn't expect. Well, maybe you did expect to come talk about bowel movements. So let's talk about bowel movements. So ideally, you want to be passing 30 centimeters of fecal matter a day, 30 centimeter poo. I don't mind. I know it's surprising. I don't mind. That's a big 30 centimeters. I don't mind 130. 215s, 310s. I don't mind how you get there. 6.5s is no good. That means you just, it's going through you too fast, most likely. There's a transit time, which is time in to time out. So the time in to time out should be 12 to 24 hours. Okay, there's a couple of really fun ways to test this. The first one is to eat a bunch of beetroot. Okay, yeah, you know that already, like, yeah, beetroot, I've seen that, yeah, good. Okay, so it should be 12 to 24 hours. Eat the beetroot, 12 to 24 hours, you should be seeing red in the stool. For some people, they don't see the red in the stool for 70, 80 hours later. So that means it's staying in them way too long. Even though they're not technically constipated, their transit times are so slow, they're too long. But we really want, imagine we want this digestive system like a gently flowing stream. Okay, we don't want to start getting pools of stagnant water there, because then that's going to be breeding these unfriendly strains of bacteria. All right, so we want to keep it flowing, really, really important. So yeah, that's another way you can test the transit time is the sweet corn. It's just bite and swallow sweet corn, and then you get to spot the corn. So
if it is too fast.
If it's too fast, yeah. So if it's too fast, that's really a sign of inflammation. So there's something. So under 12 hours is going to be too fast. And obviously, people with IBS and IBD, irritable bowel syndrome, and diseases, they can literally be 20 minutes. Which is incredible when you think about it. It's going like 20, 30 feet in 20 minutes. All right? So if it's too fast, then everything there's inflammation there. Okay, so we want to be controlling that inflammation as much as possible. So everything we've already spoken about is going to really help. But I'll be then recommending sort of a high strength fish oil like BePure 3 to shut down the inflammatory response. Okay, to try and turn off the inflammation. And then it's about modifying the microbiome to the degree that your immune system can tolerate it. Okay, because at the end of the day, it's not about whether you have a parasite or not. It's about whether your immune system can tolerate that parasite. Right. So the interesting thing about me is like that's when my wife got the parasite. I was like, oh, I'm drinking that water too. I must have it too. And so I did my test, and I didn't actually have it. Okay, and so but I have very strong hydrochloric acid genetically, and so that's part of the role of hydrochloric acid to stop parasites getting in. Whereas my wife genetically has very weak hydrochloric acid. Anyway, and so, but a couple of years later, so I then started doing stool sampling every year just for fun, looking for parasites, and I actually picked up the parasite, but I had no symptomology at all. So I then not like it's about whether your system can tolerate it or not. So that's a different line for everybody. And so, but at the end of the day, the more that we can move our microbiome into a broader, deeper, wide variety of beneficial bacteria, that's coupled with better health and better health outcomes. So it's about breadth, width, depth in our microbiome. And that's going to help modulate our immune response and control inflammation. So if it's fast, invariably there's inflammation there. So, so there's obviously probiotics, which I'm sure you've all heard about. So probiotics are the beneficial bacteria. Well, they're a bacteria that have been known benefit to human health. So traditional cultures ate probiotics. Traditional cultures, actually, my studies of traditional cultures were getting 12 to 15 servings of probiotics a day because they didn't have refrigerators. So most, a lot of their foods, all of their dairy was raw. A lot of the some vegetables they were fermenting, okay, as storage mechanisms, and so then they were getting fermented vegetables. Even their alcohol was probiotic because they weren't pasteurizing their alcohol. They were, and so when you start looking at this is a study looking at fermented foods, microbiota, mental health. Ancient practice meets nutritional psychiatry. So they're now talking about fermented foods as being nutritional psychiatry in regards to we can change the way we think and feel by eating fermented foods. Another study showed a dramatic reduction in social anxiety. Actually, it was a 72% response rate, and I think it was about a 50% remission rate in social anxiety by giving them more fermented foods. Okay, so
in cultures where fermented food is a normal food, do you know if they actually have less issues, the dietary issues?
Yeah, so in cultures where they were eating more fermented foods, do we know whether they're actually having less gut or issues? We don't now because a few cultures on the planet that are still living that way. So even in the 1920s and 30s, a researcher called Dr. Weston A. Price went around the world studying indigenous and native cultures, studying their diets and studying their health outcomes. And even then he struggled. He came to New Zealand and he struggled to he actually found an isolated group of Maori living in Mahia, Northern Hawke's Bay. It's a wonderful place. I like it greatly. And he deemed them to have the best immunity and the finest physical specimens of any people on the planet. And they were eating very much a traditional diet. So I did my master's thesis on Maori diet. So they're eating a lot of fats, proteins, a lot of seafood, mineral-rich diet, and again raw dairy. They were fermenting crayfish. So they basically catch crayfish, and if they caught too many, they put it in a kite, chuck it in the stream. Same deal they do with the corn. So the rotten corn, chuck it in the stream, and basically ferment it. And then, if they weren't able to get out and get crays because of the weather, they'd then eat that. And so they were healthy. But in the modern world, it's tough to find people that are eating that way and haven't necessarily been impacted by antibiotics.
I was just thinking really of Asia where kimchi and
a
lot of that is normal.
Yes, well, the Okinawans, that's right. They're eating a lot of kimchi, and and certainly even still now their health outcomes are much better than many places in the Western world. Yeah, and so traditional cultures. So there's a lot of wonderful things. Obviously, sauerkraut, kimchi, raw dairy or coconut yogurt. Even the apple cider vinegar is going to be, so I make sure it's unpasteurized. Okay, so that's going to be a probiotic. And then obviously you've got, these incredible, some of you drinking these beautiful drinks, otherwise like caffeine soda, it's going to be slightly different temperatures, different strains of bacteria. But the goal is to try and get as many broad width, depth of beneficial bacteria into our guts as possible. Right? And that's then coupled with better health outcomes. And so it's not only about giving ourselves the bacteria, but part of the problem we have in the modern world is the bacteria eat the food that we don't eat. And so if we can't break down the food, that's food for them. And so that's called prebiotics. So prebiotics are foods for the bacteria, for the beneficial bacteria. So they love plants. They love plant fibers. Okay, so when we look down there, look at like fruit and veg. That's what they love most. But again, we're not necessarily in the modern world. We have a very calorie heavy diet, but it's not so nutrient dense, and we're not necessarily looking at nourishing ourselves as much as we possibly could. And so I just picked out a few key ones. So persimmons, they're in season right now, and so I'm a big fan of in season because you're getting more vitamins and vitamin C, more B vitamins with in season fruit. And so persimmons are great. So your onion, your garlic, your leeks, all these guys are fantastic food for the beneficial bacteria. And then the other standout performance is going to be your beans, lentils, chickpeas. Okay, so again, they're going to be fantastic. So you want to try to get these things into the diet as much as possible as well. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, if you're following a low FODMAP diet, so for those of you who don't know, FODMAP diet is a diet that really eliminates all the food for all bacteria. And it's the #1 recommended diet for people with irritable bowel syndrome or IBD. So if somebody goes on a low FODMAP diet and it works, it just tells me that you've got an unfriendly bacteria living there that shouldn't be there. Okay, so then we need to go do a map those bacteria, have a look and see what you're going to find Klebsiella or a strep, something that you don't really want to be there. Okay, and then you want to knock it out, and then you can eat those foods without getting the symptomology. Okay, yeah, I'm not a fan of people being FODMAP diet. We use it clinically, but we only use it short term. I'm not a fan of it being long term because it's so restrictive, and not only that, it then limits the food for the beneficial bacteria as well. So then you start, you start limiting your serotonin and dopamine production, which isn't good either. And so, so testing. I recommend testing for that. BePure Clinic can help you with that. All right. Good. Let me foods. Just to whip back around to foods. Try and listen to your body as much as possible. It's not always easy, but sometimes our bodies will scream at us when we eat the wrong food, and even then sometimes we don't listen. And so just try and listen to your body. I know that seems weird thing to say maybe. I'm a big fan of testing, but at the end of the day, if you're listening to your body will give you a lot of clues. If it's just around bowel movements, if it's around bloating, if it's around how you feel, if it's around acid reflux. The number of people I've seen at seminars who I talk about gluten, and they go, "Oh, you know what? I always know that when I eat gluten, I get acid reflux," but they still eat gluten. They're like, my dad was a classic. It took him 10 years to give up gluten. Yeah, sourdough's much easier to digest because the sourdough process helps break down the gluten to a degree, and sometimes for some people it's not actually the gluten, it's the yeast, it's the commercial yeasts that are the problem, and so the sourdoughs, again, they tolerate those much better as well. So it's just a matter of kind of listening to the body and seeing. So I've just got I've tried to sort of put that information into 7 succinct tips. Let's go. So remove. We want to remove stress and kind of remove gut compromising foods, sugar, gluten, Western diet foods. Right? So we want to remove stress, gut compromising. We want to add deep belly breathing. We want to add some support for the stomach. So hydrochloric acid or apple cider vinegar, lemon juice. We want to add gut-loving, nourishing foods. So these prebiotics here, these things that are going to feed. We want to add gut healing foods. So gelatin, broths are going to be fantastic. And then we also want to add fermented foods or probiotics. All right. And so there's a little bit of a recipe there for you. All right, so maybe we'll roll into a Q&A. We took a few questions as we went through, which was lovely. But should we? Do you have any other further questions? Yeah.
We did mention a couple of times about serotonin.
Yeah.
And about, I guess that's about sleep.
Mood, more mood. So it's more depression. So yeah. So melatonin's the sleepy one.
Oh, melatonin.
Yeah, you're very close. It's okay.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah.
So any ideas on that?
On the sleep side.
On foods that disrupt or
Yeah, foods that disrupt. So you have to be careful with sugars prior to bed because they destabilize blood sugar levels. The best food to eat probably would be turkey. We don't have turkey here much in New Zealand, but turkey is very high in tryptophan, which is a direct precursor to melatonin. And so eating turkey would be beneficial. For a lot of people with sleep, it may be a melatonin issue. Blue light. So as we get blue light in the evening, it stimulates our body's release of cortisol, our daytime stress hormone. And so for some people, they can be sensitive to that. So it may be a melatonin issue. If there's a gut issue, that can also be driving sleep issues from acid reflux, heartburn, but also from a stress perspective. So what tends to happen is if you've got a gut issue, you have an increased immune response. And then because you've got an increased immune response, your body releases more cortisol to control and modulate that immune response. And then the cortisol trumps melatonin, which stops you from being able to sleep. So it's a bit of a step-by-step process. But yeah, so that could also be a contributing factor. So I would look at if there's no inflammatory issues in the body, I'd be looking at melatonin and trying to bring the body down in preparation for the release of melatonin. Cool. Yeah.
When you're taking prebiotics, probiotics,
Yeah.
etc., is it something you have to continually do, or is it something that just resets?
Yeah, great question. So when you're taking like probiotics, is it something that you continually do, or is it something you just do to reset? So for some people, you can definitely continue. There's no harm in continually doing it. So I have to admit, I take BePure 2 just regularly, just to keep my microbiome kind of balanced. But often for a lot of people, they may just take it for a period of time and feel those benefits. My accountant, he's not a big believer in food or nutrition, but he finds that when he takes a probiotic, his immune system's just incredible, and he likes to work, and so he doesn't like to get sick. He's an accountant, and so he's been taking the probiotic for like years, maybe every day. He's like religious, and he doesn't take anything else, just takes a probiotic. And so I think it's about, again, probiotics and the gut side is finding what works for you. And for some people, if you've got a gut that's kind of marginal, you may need to support that long term. Whereas if you've got a bulletproof gut, then you may do better investing your money in other products.
Because my husband and I took, not your brand,
Yeah.
the one that you got from the fridge.
Yeah.
And we did it for 6 months, and to me, he suffers from malnutrition.
Yeah.
And it made no difference. He still had these bouts where it just exploded diarrhea or whatever. And he eats less than me because his stomach is not
Always uncomfortable.
He's 16. Looks like he's got a beard, doesn't drink.
Doesn't drink, and he's bloated.
Yeah, it's actually malnutrition, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. He's so, as you can see, husband's bloated and took probiotics and they didn't make a difference. So for me, there's a lot of reasons why people could be bloated, and probiotics just kind of one piece of the puzzle. Definitely worth trying, but if it doesn't work, then you've got to kind of move on to the next thing. Start. I mean, we can help him at the clinic if he's open to it. And guys are quite. They're harder to get into nutrition, but once you get them into them, especially with some testing, and they get a piece of paper and some results, they can be quite empowering and almost competitive around, okay, I'm going to get my microbiome better. What do I need to eat? And and so they actually, once you get them in and into it, they go really well. So let's hope that's the case in your husband. Good. What else? Yeah.
What to do if prebiotic foods are also gas producers in your body?
Yes, yes. So if the prebiotic foods are also gas producers, then that is again really an indication of an imbalance in the microflora with the microbiome. So it kind of tells us there may be an excess of the methane-producing bacteria species there, and so we really want to map it so that then you can see, and then you can see, well, what species do we need to be competitive against that? So because they're all living there. We're basically like a block of flats for them. We literally are. We just wander around. We are their home, and they're living off whatever we chuck down this hole, and and so they're just trying to survive. And so if they've got a little niche there where they've got part of the large intestine like all cornered off where it's them living, sometimes you need to go and disrupt that. So we use biofilm disruptors. So if we're coming in and modifying someone's microbiome, we'll come in and use biofilm disruptors to disrupt the microbiome, and then we'll use specific kill agents to kill off some of those bad guys, and then we'll come in and add the good guys back in to replenish and recolonate that area. And so it's kind of like a blend of art and science. The science is coming very quickly, but it's still we don't have all the science that we need to be able to do this as accurately as we'd maybe like, but it's definitely coming. But at the end of the day, like these core things, like just getting zinc levels up and stuff like that, are absolutely critical. Like because you could spend $1,000 on all this testing, but if you've got low zinc, it's not going to make any difference. Because if you haven't got your hydrochloric acid set up from the beginning, then it doesn't make a difference. Yeah, very good. Yeah.
On average, if someone comes to your clinic, how long does it take to actually make an assessment and diagnose?
Yeah. So on average, how long does it take for us to? Usually, I would like within one session, you're going to get a good idea of what you're going to be up for. So, for me, after talking to somebody for one session, I've got a pretty good idea. Okay, I've got at least an 80% idea of. Okay, we need to do this, and we're most likely going to find that, which then means we're going to need to do this. And so, very quickly you've got an idea of the plan, but it still can take, depending on the dysfunction, it could take 6 to 9 months.
And then you covered under medical insurance?
Unfortunately, it's not covered by medical insurance, yeah. And so, at this stage, the testing is kind of outside of that scope. Yeah.
And you're located at?
No, we're located in Ponsonby now. So we have a virtual clinic that services Australia and New Zealand. That's all based in Ponsonby. Yeah.
You said you can have with the testing. How does that, in the past, you would always probably do an elimination diet to find out whether this something could take like 6 weeks, but you can actually do it in one test. And it will tell you if the area where you're. Yeah.
So with the testing, what we're looking at is, elimination diets are fine too, but like you say, they take a lot of effort and a lot of time. And the problem with elimination diets is sometimes you don't eliminate the 2 foods you need to eliminate, so you don't get the improvement in the benefit. We had one lady with an underactive thyroid, and it was almonds and blueberries were the 2 major problems for her. And so you never would have picked that, right? And so doing an elimination diet, you probably wouldn't have ever found that. So what we do it's a blood test, and it looks to see whether your body's building immune molecules to the food. And so we're looking at the immune response to the food. Right? So that's and it'll be either an IgE immune response, which is an allergy. So generally, you know your allergies. But if you eat that, you get that straight away. But then IgA immune responses, which is what a celiac has to wheat, gluten, and so that's a very severe immune response, but you don't know about it. So a lot of celiacs don't really feel a problem from eating wheat. And then an IgG immune response, which is again a lower level again, but it's delayed. So you can eat the food and you may not get an immune response for up to 30 days after you've eaten it. And so they're really hard to find.
But your tests show all those.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
much are they?
I actually don't know. It's a good question. There's a very within each test. There's a big range of availability of different things. So I think they probably start at around $450. So they're pretty serious. So again, that's why I recommend people do the basics first. Get your zinc levels up. Maybe take a decent probiotic like BePure 2. Take some digestive enzymes. Start, get gluten out your diet. Because if you haven't got gluten out your diet, if you come in and you're still eating gluten, we're going to be to take it out anyway. Okay, and so invariably, so do the foundation principles first, and you'd be amazed, and I'm often amazed that for 80% of people they get dramatic improvements just from doing the foundation things, just the foundation things. Okay, yeah, even just like getting bone broth in you regularly, like every day. Yeah.
Can you bone broth?
So with ulcers, so stomach ulcers, probably not. But what you can do with stomach ulcers, stomach ulcers are invariably, they can be from too much acid. They can also be from Helicobacter pylori. Okay, so you can eat, they probably sell them here. So you get broccoli sprouts, sprout broccoli. Ideally, when they're 3 days old, you can just do them yourself. Eat 2 tablespoons a day for 2 weeks. In the research, that's been shown to get rid of Helicobacter pylori. All right. So I'd knock out the Helicobacter pylori. There's other ways you can do it. We use herbs in the clinic to knock it out. Okay. And then if you can tolerate aloe vera is very, very beneficial for there's a molecule in aloe vera that very much helps the cells repair very quickly. And so then I'd put somebody on aloe vera and go from there. Yeah, the aloe vera drink. Yeah. With aloe vera, it's very, very well tolerated, but just put some on your skin first before you drink it, just to make sure that you're not getting an allergic reaction. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so alcohol, great question. Alcohol is really damaging to the gut. So alcohol on an empty stomach just trashes the gut. Absolutely trashes the small intestine. So it trashes the villi. And so you have to be really careful with that. And so obviously when people are coming in with gut problems, we assess alcohol use, and we're being really mindful about moving people away from alcohol most of the time. But with alcohol, invariably most people you have to look at why we're doing it. And so for most of us, we may use alcohol to relax. I think it's very common. And so it's then how do we find other ways that we can relax that isn't alcohol? So I'll give you an example of that. I had a lady come and see me, client who she had an autoimmune condition. She had gut issues. So she was coming in for the autoimmune condition. Very quickly, we were like, "It's coming from your gut." And so we went down the gut road with it. And she drank quite a lot of alcohol, a lot of specific Chardonnay, like at least 2 glasses a night of Chardonnay. And so, we had no chance of healing her gut while she was on 3 glasses of Chardonnay. And actually, I didn't even, I picked that up in her notes coming in, but I didn't even talk about her Chardonnay for the first 6 weeks of her seeing me, because if I said, "Oh, you've got to cut out alcohol," I wouldn't have seen her again. All right, and so we got some other wins first, got some wins under a belt, got some trust, okay, and then we're like, well, let's talk about this alcohol. So anyway, it turns out she was a marketing executive and in Wellington, and when her cue for relaxing, really high stress job, and her cue for relaxing, as soon as she got home, she would pour herself a glass of Chardonnay and hop in the jacuzzi, and then she'd stay in the jacuzzi for the next hour or so drinking Chardonnay. Sounds pretty good, eh? It's a good strategy for relaxing. But alcohol's a sedative, it's relaxing. She had anxiety as well, and alcohol reduces anxiety until the next day when you get more anxiety and need more alcohol. Anyway, and so it turned out that when we have addictions, we're addicted to the environment as much as the actual thing. And so we were able to get her to get the same relaxation response and completely stop drinking by coming into the jacuzzi and having a glass of vitamin C. Now, vitamin C lowers cortisol, so you get actually a better physiological response. It relaxes you. The key to it was that it had to be a Chardonnay glass. So she still had to be sitting in there holding a Chardonnay glass because she got then the physiological cues for relaxation. So she still felt like she was drinking a Chardonnay, but it just happened to be Super Boost C. And yeah, lower her cortisol levels. So yeah, so with alcohol, there's lots of different. I mean, that's part of the coaching process. I think of clinician, of helping people. You're part psychologist, part nutritionist. Yeah, very good. Any other questions? Yeah. So painkillers, it depends on the painkiller, but invariably they're harder on the liver. And so, which I mean, I'm not a fan of anyone being in pain, so I have no problem with painkillers, but they are hard on the liver. And then certainly for some forms of irritable bowel syndrome, the liver is associated with that, because all of the blood from the intestines, from the portal vein, goes directly to the liver. And so if the liver's backed up, it can actually back up the blood flow and back up the intestinal flow. And so these people will usually have an IBS symptom where they'll have diarrhea for a day and then constipated for 3 days. Diarrhea for a day, constipated for 3 days. And that's usually a liver issue. And so then if you're talking to them and they've got an extensive history of medication use for pain control, okay, for me, I'd be then going, okay, this is a liver issue, and what would go off rather than a specific gut issue, there'd still be dysbiosis, so still be unfriendly bacteria, but would be chasing the liver a lot harder than would be chasing the large intestine. All right. Oh, good. All right. So should we have some drinks and some nibbles? Is that right? And yeah. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you for Farro for inviting us, and BePure, and lovely fermented people. Oh, there they are. Thank you.